Hello, and welcome to this virtual lesson for Chapter 10, Communications Planning. So let's get started. So on the agenda for today, there's two things. First is, how should our documents be stored during the project? And secondly, what should be communicated? So let's start out. Again, let's look at our project life cycle. We are just finishing up the planning phase. So we are made our way through all of the different aspects of planning, and we're now at communications planning. Um, Again, remember that these planning stages are shown sequentially and taught sequentially in the course and in the textbook, but in reality, they're happening relatively simultaneously. That on any given day, you're moving back and forth between the different planning aspects, and it certainly doesn't mean you leave all your communication planning till the end of the planning phase. So it's just the last thing that we're about to talk about. So, two main questions. How should our documents be stored? We're going to be creating lots and lots of documents during a project. How are we going to store them? How are we going to look them up? Where are they going to be? And so on. So all of those things are important. And then, secondly, what should be communicated? What should we do? So there's two documents. The first one was the project documentation guidelines. The second one was the communication management plan. So let's get started on that first one. So how should documents be stored? Well, during a project, there's a large number of project documents that are created. I'm sure in the course you're already becoming aware that there's a lot of documents that are created, and on large scale projects, there's even more. Without a plan of where to store these documents and how to organize them, it can become increasingly difficult to find and update them. That can become a risk. We just talked about risk previously. That itself can become a risk because we may be unable to find them, or we might be working with the wrong information, and we certainly don't want that to happen. That's why we need to think about our guidelines. What processes should we put in place to address that? And so that's the creation of a project documentation guidelines document, which should address the following at a minimum. One is the storage location and organization. Where are we going to store them, and how are we going to organize them? Let's just be consistent on that. Document naming conventions. If you have one or two documents, you can call them whatever you want. If you have hundreds or thousands, you need to name them effectively so that you can find them later. And then lastly, an indication of, do we need multiple versions of a document? For example, do we need to be able to say this is what a certain document was as of a certain date? And sometimes we need that for legal purposes and so on. So let's move on. It's now time to move to the case study. So please pause the video and move to the case study, which you will find in Chapter 10. So just do that, and then come on back to this video once you've done. Okay, so you've completed that, and you've seen the process of the project manager determining the project documentation guidelines. So here's an example of what came out of the DecoCam version 4 product launch project. And so what was decided that all project documents will be stored on a secured project website. Many times the organization itself already has procedures or already has a location that project documents should be stored in. So oftentimes it's just following the organizational policies, which is okay. Sometimes it's not, in which case you need to determine where it should be. So in this case, they're going to use a secured project website, and that Sophie will be the administrator and will grant read and read-write access to her project team and others as needed. So she's kind of the gatekeeper of this. And these are the folders that were to be set up. So you can see the different folders that are being defined, and they're all listed there. These are the naming conventions of the document files. Now you can see they're very descriptive. It shows a project ID or code. So we see DC, that would stand for DecoCam version 4 launch. And then, so that's sort of the code for the project, the project ID, the document name, project charter, a version number if required, and then the date of the report or the document, the date that was created. So you can see that it's in year, month, day format. And then there's some examples there. And then finally, there's the document versions section. So it indicates which documents require versions that'll be created. There's certain milestones where a new version will be created. That's for very important documents would have that, such as, for example, the project charter and project scope statement. So the creation of the guidelines allows for then the project team to know where to store project documents, how to name them, and where to access them. So it's very important. The next question is, what should be communicated? The value of effective communication during a project cannot be overstated. So there's nothing I can say right now to say it's really important. It's really, really important. It just is. It just is. So you can't overstate that. And the development of a communication plan is therefore really essential to do. You should not just let communication just happen on its own. You should be planful about this. And this plan should include both the communication of project information, making sure that the people that need to know the information are that they have that information available to them. And secondly, should include the communication of project status information so that the ongoing status or condition of the project is communicated. Again, at this point, please pause the video and go to chapter 10 and read through the case study update, creating the communication management plan. So please pause now and then come on back when you're done. Okay, so the case study update. So let's review what happened. Sophie reviews the stakeholder analysis document to ensure she understands the needs of each stakeholder, and this is very essential. Stakeholder analysis has already been done previously in our planning or concurrently in our planning, and that's where communication comes in, as we should be understanding who our stakeholders are, and therefore then we can start to figure out what information do they need. So the stakeholder management plan and communication management plan are connected in that way. This allows her to consider the types of information that would be needed by each stakeholder. And she also considers the communication medium. For example, in some cases, a meeting may be warranted, while in other cases, an email may suffice. That selection of, is it face-to-face? Is it a meeting? Is it an email, a text message? Is it a posting on a web page or something like that? Those are considerations that should be made in terms of what is the most effective way of satisfying the communication needs. And to do so, you have to understand, first of all, what is it that you're communicating, and then what are the needs of each stakeholder. So it's something that should be very much considered. Here's the end product of the communication management plan for the case study project. And you can see in the leftmost column, there are the communications that have been defined. For example, there is a project kickoff meeting. There's a distribution of the project charter, scope review and sign-off meeting, daily project team huddle. So you can see there's a number of communication vehicles that have been defined. The next column describes what it is, what a project kickoff meeting is, what the project charter, the scope review, and so on, the daily project team huddle. The audience or attendees for each is defined, and that's where, again, the stakeholders are the consideration of the different stakeholders would help us figure out who should be there. And then the timing. If it's a one-time thing, such as a project kickoff meeting, it's the date that we are going to plan to do it. If it's something that's repetitive, for example, like the daily project team huddle, that would be, well, what's the frequency? For example, is it weekly, daily, every 2 weeks, and so on? And so that's would be defined in this column here. Um, so just a few notes about the communication management plan in general is that this is a documentation of the planned communications that you're going to perform. It doesn't necessarily, or it shouldn't, contain all of the different communication, say the informal communication that naturally occurs between team members and stakeholders, where, as you're meeting each other in the morning, between meetings, or you're walking down the hallway and so on, and communication takes place. Of course, that's happening, and that's not documented in the communication management plan. That's the natural communication that occurs between people on a project. This is the things that you're planning to do, and that by documenting them, you can make sure that they happen and that they will occur within the schedule of your project. There's the second page and so on. We can see that it moves on to the status report, this weekly status review, meaning the company announcement, which will be later in the project and the final project meeting and so on. So this lays it all out, and then allows you to ensure or help ensure that effective communication takes place during the project, which, as we said at the start, was very, very important. There's the references for this PowerPoint. So again, thanks very much for watching this.